Hi everyone, welcome to another week. Hope you're enjoying your Sunday. If you're watching this on Monday, welcome to the week. And as per usual, as last week, we want to take the opportunity to kickstart us off. You know, you got the learning kit. You got this week's topic. And as a little bit of an onboarding, we wanted to record this video together with this week's guest, which will join us in the live session. And welcome to you, Mia. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Maybe first of all, Mia, before we dive into it, can you tell us a little bit about you and what kind of gets you excited about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I am currently working as a head of business development, kind of heading innovation and all new digital projects, everything related to transforming the digital business of a big media publishing company based in Denmark at Bunny Publications. So originally we produce magazines, but of course, as you probably know and understand, we are in the middle of a big transformation, becoming something else in a really, really tough market. So basically, that's what I'm working with.
Cool.
And I think one of the things that makes me really excited about this is kind of having the conversation where we are moving away from only talking about skills and digital transformation in relation to that, and moving towards focusing on leadership. And what that does and the impact that the leadership part and your approach to leadership, what that has on driving digital transformation, driving the changes that are needed in organization and the whole agile transformation as well, because there's so much to be done in that field and we are only just at the beginning of it, where I think up until now we've been focusing a lot on what skills do we need? What do we need to do? And I think it's super interesting to move that conversation up on a leadership level and talk about what that requires as us, from us as leaders.
Yeah, loving that, and also like the implications on the bigger picture on culture, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you create conditions for that to kind of come together?
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, dealing with everything that it kind of stands in its way today, or that
Yeah, I mean, it becomes like two sides of the same thing, because as a leader, you will be responsible for driving that culture, and it is one of the core pillars of what you need to support in order to drive the change that you want to create.
Yeah. Brilliant. Oh, I really look forward to, first of all, to diving into this together with you now, but also to the live session where we'll get an opportunity to dig into some of all of your participants' current opportunities and challenges on this topic.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about.
Yes, but I asked you, Mia, to prepare a couple of things. So maybe you want to share your screen.
Yeah,
take us through that. And as you know, all of you, while Mia gets her screen on, so the Learning Kit has loads of different things. You could go deep on a lot of different things, but we wanted to frame this as a complementary point of view. So really adding on another layer of practice and an approach here from Mia. Mm-hmm. So yeah, do you want to take us through your stuff, Mia?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see my screen now, right?
Yes, all good.
Perfect. Yes, so I'm super excited about doing this, not having a normal lecture, and really working through this with you, Sveinung. And I really hope that you will get something out of it, and I also really hope that it's something that can spark reflection in you for the live session, where we're going to dive more into practical cases, which is definitely where my heart lies. Getting into the nitty-gritty of making and creating that change. But for me, I think when we talk about change and creating digital change or working with teams, I think it's important to address kind of this concept of a new, what I call digital leadership. I think you can frame it in many different ways, but for me, it kind of makes sense that the overall umbrella is called digital leadership, or we at some point I see that as a natural progression, a change, or removing the word digital and just
Right.
like new leadership. But I think that's part of the transformation. It's a middle step. It's a stepping stone that we need to use until people are sort of completely on board. So yeah, it's a transition. But kind of using that lens, and that's what I see this topic through when it comes to this week's content. And I think everyone by now agrees on the fact that we need to have a multidisciplinary view on creating this. We really need to respect that we need many different competences. It's not something that one person can solve. I think on a high level, conceptual level, everyone understands that. So far so good. But then the question is, how do we do it? What do we do it? And for me, it really makes sense to focus on what it means for us as leaders, no matter if you are a formal leader or if you're more an informal leader, change maker. And today I want to talk through 3 main principles that I'm working with to sort of guide my way of leading others and leading my teams. And I think it's a good way of, it's some concepts that are really good at thinking about when you're doing day-to-day work, when you're working with other people, because it's not like this is a recipe that is if you only do this, everything will be good. It's a process, and change is a process, of course.
And I like these as like like indicators, right, of being on the right track, because these are pretty tangible, and you could find data to support them or to not in different ways, like asking people, asking your team, working with it actively, but also kind of indirectly. So these are great pillars.
Exactly, and I also think you can really cut the cake in many different ways, and you can use different models on it. This is just kind of my take, what makes sense from my practical standpoint based on my experiences. So I think you'll probably recognize that some of the things that you've seen that in other contexts, or you use another model, just to say that, of course, there's an overlap in other theoretical frameworks, but this is very much a practical.
Yeah. I love that.
So I think one of the first main one, which is basically the foundation, is using trust and trust earning as a lens for really understanding like the blockers and the frustrations and the friction when it comes to driving that change. And what I would do is basically, I would use it as a wider concept from what I normally hear. It's not only the way that we normally think about trust, but it's also about trust in self. It's also about earning trust and being humble about other people's trust and understanding where they are coming from. So there's a lot of things under the umbrella of that.
I love the idea of looking at it beyond, like, trust can sometimes be thought of as this like currency that you need to have so that you could spend it. And then when you go low, you need to rebuild it. But the idea that it's more of in a sense, more holistic, that is also about you and about the foundation that you create in all kind of directions, right? Inward, outward, upward, downward, whatever you want to look at it. Yeah. I like that.
And I think it makes a lot of sense. And I also think that one problem is that we tend to talk a lot about that there needs to be trust. So it's it's kind of like you have to have trust. It's a demand to have trust, but that's not the reality. And thinking that that's the case is just going to be bring a lot of frustration. But we don't really talk a lot about, like, how do we create it? What is it that we create to trust? And that is, at least from my perspective, both more. I'm going to dive more into that, but it's not just the fundamental psychological things. It's also that, but it's also very much the small things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. It's actually very practical things, and it has a lot to do about being reliable. And just really doing your things and looking beyond your own needs. when it comes
Yeah,
to
great.
yeah. So more focus on how do you actually create it, more than just talking about it as something everyone has or needs to have more of. And then the second part is expanding the concept of the learning organization to talking about a collective learning culture, which is something that I really believe in. And it's also something that I have seen work really, really well, also as a way of establishing that sense of team. And of course, it's also related to the trust earning, but I'll come back to that. It's super important. And then I think the third pillar is maybe the more challenging one for some more modern and progressive leaders. I think this is usually where I get a lot of pushback, because people have a hard time kind of grasping what does it mean to be more guiding in your leadership, because they have heard recently that they need to be more supporting self-leadership, that it's about trusting people and letting them do their work. And suddenly I'm suggesting things that are much more, in some people's mind, backwards looking when it comes to management. But it really makes sense, I think.
I think, to be honest, I think there are stereotypes around modern leadership about the kind of coach and the kind of friend, and the kind of enabler leader, and the old, hierarchical, totalitarian leader. But actually, if you look at, the kind of framework that we introduced last week around the integrated model for group development, and look at the leader's perspective there, and the different, the concept of situation-based leadership,
exactly,
kind of plays to this. The context is now of a certain speed and complexity that another, this situation requires.
Yes,
different type of leader.
Exactly. And I think that's the perspective that needs to be brought into this. I guess now we're kind of diving into it, but it's a really important aspect that you're bringing up there when it comes to the model, because everything that we do today is really, really early days. It's like really high complexity, a lot of unknowns, no structures in place, no roles, no responsibilities in place. We are really doing this for the first time. Many of the projects that we are working on, and the roles that we hire, and when so many things are up in flux, it really means that basically the complexity is really high, and the level of development that the group is on is immature.
Yeah.
So
could you take us through some examples of these things? I know it's like to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah. Let's just take them from the beginning.
Yeah, great.
I'll just go on. I think this lens about building trust and earning trust in what it means in organizational context is that I have this image of a burnt child, and to kind of think about, like, no matter what organizational context that you go into or that you are in, you are dealing with people, which essentially organization is people, with a history. Just like in any other relationship, if you're dating someone, that person will have a history, and sometimes you'll have people with a history of mostly joyful memories, but you'll definitely also have people with a lot of traumas in the backpack. And having a kind of an understanding of what is it that they bring in is really crucial in understanding both why am I not gaining trust, what is it that makes this person untrustful, or even scared of change. But the first thing is really to take a step back and understanding what kind of history is this person bringing in, or what kind of history is this organization bringing in. Because it can be on an individual level. It always is on an individual level, but it's also on a structural level. And having that in mind, I think, is the first step. And then, of course, I think it's important to deliver on the small things when it comes to that. So if you are dealing with a person who has trust issues because of something bad that happened, where they felt they couldn't trust someone else. They felt that in an organizational context, someone didn't deliver on their projects. They tried something that didn't work and they got punished for it. Someone got fired when the project didn't work out, or they got demoted, or they didn't hit their target, which meant that they somewhat got ridiculed in public, or that they continuously thought that someone else had the ball and really expected someone else to deliver, and they didn't, and they were kind of left. If you start to see, okay, what are the patterns that is taking place, you also start to understand what needs to happen. And what needs to happen is that you really need to be prepared, and you need to deliver on your things. It may sound super simple, but you'll be surprised in how many times it doesn't happen. That people simply don't deliver on what was agreed on, that things just get paused, or I don't know, it never really worked out, or the things that were promised just stalled, which is really not the way to build trust.
Yeah.
And then it's also about like being prepared, designing good processes for what you're going through when you're standing in front of these complex projects. It's important to sort of find out, where am I going with this, and how would I design a process. And that also, of course, means you need to have different competences. Things like having great facilitators, meeting designers, and working with process design. It's a new competence, but it's actually really important to address this kind of complexity, and lifting everyone's, because no one really knows what they're going to do, so they need someone to kind of guide them through it.
Yeah.
So I think that's super important. I also think that it's important to understand that this whole old way of leading, the Tayloristic approach to leading people in a production age, it's still taking its toll on people. And there's still a lot of companies that are, or organizations that are trying to optimize and efficientize companies before they really know what they are doing when it comes to these things. And that is also really important to understand where that is coming from, and suggest a new way of doing things. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. No, and I think it also, like, I think something that resonates with what you said also is about how, with having the opportunity and the kind of, because you need confidence as a leader to be able to do this, right? And you need to be vulnerable, and you need to some extent also maybe understand a little bit more about what goes on in people's worlds, what happened, so maybe also, like, through this course, for example, but other ways too, like understanding some of the things that are happening in our brains and in our bodies when we go through these things, because people will not necessarily have all the answers. They won't necessarily have the relationship to open up about these things. So how do you then facilitate these, this trust building in a good way? So I think that's I think you mentioned facilitators or people that can help design, so intentionally design processes where this can come out as a byproduct or as the main thing.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of, people react differently to stress, and not feeling trust is a way of, it's kind of it's a kind of a stress sign, I think. And people will, in an organizational context, in my experience, react very differently on the same kind of thing. The fact is that they usually don't know what to do, and that stresses them. They feel they don't really have control of the outcome. They feel they have to know the answers on something that is really complex, and that stresses people. And then some people or different people will react differently to that. Some will be starting to become very political and trying to never really say something that they're committed to, or they will be just passive and say, like, that's not my responsibility, doesn't have anything to do with me. Or they will become like why are we challenging and why are we doing this? I don't understand it. Shouldn't we just do it in the old way? So it's just, and you tend to focus on these reactions to stress, but the core problem is basically that they don't really know what to do. So basically, I think it starts with the trust, and this is a very simple model, but for me, everything that is important in leading people today is about starts with the trust. It's about learning and creating that learning culture. You can only do that if you have trust and if you feel safe, or psychological safety is also a concept I know you've been through. It's very difficult to take in new things if you have, it's kind of like having a computer and you're using all your RAM on being worried that you're not good enough, or how are you going to solve these difficult challenges that you're standing in front. It's really difficult to take in new knowledge if you're really calm and you can use.
You have no bandwidth left to handle it. Yeah,
exactly. You need your full capacity to take in these new learnings. It's also really difficult to get feedback and listen to that feedback if you don't have that trust. And it's also really difficult to collaborate with other people and trust them. And for me, I think one of the things that are really important that I always look at is the level of competition. So it's really important for me if I see something in my group of people where I see tendencies to people trying to compete with each other. To close that down really, really quickly. And unfortunately, a lot of our leadership style today is built around individual goals and performances that doesn't really have a collective aspect, where it's mostly about your individual goals, and that really feeds the competitive level in a group. So I try to remove that. I try to have a focus on, I don't really care about who contributes with what. What is important for me is the level of outcome. What is the quality level of outcome? That is what everyone is being measured on in my book. And emphasize that again, and again, and then trying to remove some of the more formal individual targets and work towards more shared targets. So for me, the worst enemy of trust is competition. So that needs to be removed.
I like that.
And unfortunately, we have a lot of people in our educational system that are still being raised to compete with each other, and the grading system is still about competition, which is basically very counterproductive for what culture that needs to be created in order to address the challenges that we are facing today.
No, I
have a lot of opinions about that.
Yeah, no, great. Let's dig into more in the live session.
So I talked a little bit about this already. It's important to earn trust, and think about the little things. It actually counts, and in some ways it comes down to communication, right? It comes down to communication and preparation. So if you're prepared, that you designed a good process, that you have told people what they can expect and communicate with that, it really will go a long way. And then, of course, it goes without saying, never ever single out people, and support that team-oriented outcome in any way that you can, which means that you as a change maker needs to go the extra mile. So it's not, I'm not saying it's an easy job to be a change maker. I'm not saying it's an easy job to create cultural change, but it is very, very, it's a very big satisfaction when you succeed. Yeah. And then remember to follow up, always follow up, because it's so simple, but a lot of people simply forget it. And mostly because they're too busy. And then you think, oh, well, probably doesn't matter, but it actually does. Then the second concept is about the collective learning culture. And it is for me a matter of decentralizing. Now I see that some text didn't come up, but decentralizing knowledge. I know it's very popular in some organizations to have these knowledge centers where you have a department that are really good at X and they're really good at Y to grow that competence. But I think it's a mistake in that stage that we are in now, because I think we need to have a distributed knowledge. We really need to have people who have an overlap of competences. So if you are, say, an analytic specialist, for me, it's not like one analytic specialist. Everyone needs to have an analytical understanding. Everyone needs to be able to understand what does data mean for me, in the same way as search engine optimization or whatnot, any of the digital disciplines that we are facing today. And that means that we need to decentralize knowledge. And we need also, both as a more static way of looking at it, but also in a dynamic way of looking at it. It's also about building on top of the learning organization, which I completely buy into. I think it's important and driving that change, but also taking it one step further and say that we not only need a learning organization where individuals are continuously learning and the organization is continuously learning. We also need the level where groups are continuously learning the same things in order to get to the next level. And it really makes a lot of sense, because we need to change to change things, and we need to work in an agile way with iterations. We need everyone to have the learnings from each iterative cycle. So the iterations need to be multidisciplinary as well.
You talked about knowledge center, which is kind of like, it's just the kind of static thing, right? Once it, and bringing it down to the individual teams and into the individual leaders to really, move it from the kind of centralized bank and more into, learning culture as behavior as opposed to learning culture as content, right? Too.
Exactly. And I think the key is to work with this concept I call it the pool of knowledge, where everyone has access to the same pool of knowledge, and everyone has their own little straw that they can dip into the sea of a pool of knowledge and take whatever they need. So it's kind of a collective conscious in a way, where everyone sort of knows a little bit about the same topics, but because we're still working with our individual things, we still have our area of expertise, but we are using it for different things. So a UXer will use knowledge about some kind of customer insight in one way, and a business developer will use it in a different way. Right. But we really need to have access to the same knowledge. It's not that this is my knowledge, I'm doing the analysis, and then I will actively make an effort to share that knowledge with you if you need it. It just needs to be accessible all the time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that.
So that's basically thinking about learning as a collective thing instead of as an individual thing. And then the third pillar, which is about daring to be a guiding leader. And what does that mean? Well, I think it means you need to understand the timeline from where we are coming, where we come from, and where we are and what we are moving towards. Traditional leaders, it's of course very simplified, but from a more production industries and tayloristic approach to things, where it's top down, it's about efficient workflows and optimizing the production line, to coaching leaders, which is basically an answer to very high complexity with the rise of the information society, where there's suddenly a lot of information. It became really difficult to stay on top of it, and the answer became, okay, I'm pulling back, I'm just taking one step back and giving non-answers and say, like, what do you think, and starting to have the individuals to be self-leading, but maybe it's a little bit biased in the headline, but the non-answers is basically not necessarily helpful in driving complex complex questions. And then moving towards what I call digital leaders, or in future, just future leaders, which is about being role models. It's about understanding what is at place and really understanding it, like, on many different levels, not necessarily understanding all of the complexities, but on a high level, understanding what are the problems here and how are we solving this and what is needed to solve these things, to become role models, and to start to guide, and also to eventually referring back to the model of the group development processes, to step in and be an active contributor and collaborator when everyone knows their place. But we are not there yet. And until we are there, we need to be the ones that will set the pace and the direction, and help people come along. And that means that we need to practice a more active leadership. It's not the same as giving orders. It's a matter of challenge people professionally, asking the right questions, researching what is at play, what's taking place, and what are the complexities in this particular problem, and having a curiosity to do it, and learning new things, stepping in instead of stepping back. I think that is one of the biggest challenges of leaders today, that they really need to step in order to lead this way that is required of the new leadership. And that requires that they need to learn a lot of new things. It also means setting direction, and setting the ambition of quality, which is a very, as a personal, really, really important thing for me, is that I feel so sad that in many cases digital has become equal with good enough, instead of being really excellent. That when we are having digital products, the success criteria becomes let's just get something out, instead of let's build something that is really, really fantastic. Because of this agile paradigm, there's a lot of reasons for that, which totally makes sense, or has made sense in a previous, more immature stage. But now I think really need to start talking about digital excellence, but also setting pace. So no one else will be deciding or setting or pushing everyone to have progress and to have pace when it comes to these projects, if we're not doing it. And then moving away from it, I trust you to do it, to basically being, we will do this together, and kind of moving your chair towards the table and say, like, okay, what do we need to do? Yeah. And these are just kind of some key components that I see.
I like that.
Working as this new kind of digital leader, some things that I use as guiding points on a day-to-day basis, that is important to really understand on hands-on level, the toolbox and the key dilemmas of the people that you're working with. What is difficult for them? What is the range of tools and methods that they're working with in the individual field of expertise? Then really understanding these new generations that are coming in, and this change of mindset when it comes to work life and career development, that the people are looking for transformative experiences. They are looking to become a better version of themselves, and they are at a job to get something out of it, to develop, and really understanding what is your role as a leader to support them in that journey where they are right now. And if you're not taking that seriously, it's going to be very difficult to lead in this age. And then it's about, and one point to that, I think it's even more important that what most people are talking about these days about purpose. I think purpose is a hygiene factor, but the thing that will keep people motivated is that you as a leader will take an active role in understanding where they are going and what they're there in the current situation to learn, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely.
And then I think you have to be more contributing together with your team members and not just sit in the corner and thinking that they can solve things on their own because they're competent people. They are, but it's also highly complex things that they're working on, so they need the best brains, including yours, to be in on it as a collective effort. So not just delegating, but moving your chair towards the table, and then be available. It's not good enough to just have your bi-weekly one-to-ones. You really have to check in on a regular basis to address all of the decisions that they need to make on a daily basis. Because it's in the decision that progress will happen. So if the decisions on a daily basis are not being made, progress will stall and things will slow, and you will not see the impact of the transformation. And then it goes without saying, communication upwards and downwards. Be super transparent. No need to strategize behind closed doors, because no one is going to trust that, because 6 high-level people went into a room, came out with a big strategy, that's the recipe for success, because we don't know. So it just becomes I don't know, silly. And then be a role model. Be a role model more than a coach. Be the person that you and the behavior that you want your employees to act out.
Nice. This is a good little checklist of mantras. I'll post this as a slide too, I think, because it's really nice.
Yeah. No, I hope it made sense.
Yeah. Do you want to unshare your screen, and then we can talk a little bit about just the live session coming up? So on Thursday, when in the live session, we will dive more into this, but through the lens of what you're all sitting with, right? So making sure that you sit and reflect a little bit. What did this week's learning kit trigger with you? What did this session we just had now with the conversation here with Mia trigger with you? What are the questions or the things that either give you loads of energy or that you feel are like blocking you? And post them in the content discussions channel, ideally by Wednesday, so we can get an opportunity to look through them. And then we'll kind of roll up our sleeves and work with that in the live session on Thursday. Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mia, for sharing. It's great to get a view into your thinking here and to the practice, the leadership, and the kind of new paradigm of leadership practice that you're shaping. I love that.
I'm super excited about the live session and hearing all your input.
Yes. Okay. Now let's leave it there, and then we'll see you all on the Slack. See you then. Bye.
Bye.